Welcome again. Excited to see folks here. I'm Mathias Clasen. I'm an associate professor in the English department at Aarhus University, and I'm also director of the Recreational Fear Lab, which is a very cool research unit dedicated to the scientific investigation of recreational fear. The unit is currently supported by the Independent Research Fund Denmark with a generous grant, and now also by Innovation Fund Denmark. We have also, over the years, received generous funding from the Interacting Mind Center, all of which has allowed us to conduct studies into the pervasive, paradoxical, but scientifically understudied phenomenon of recreational fear. And by recreational fear, we mean those kinds of activities in which people derive pleasure from fear. So you can imagine teenagers watching horror movies and screaming in delight. You can imagine toddlers being chased by their parents pretending to be monsters. It could be kids doing pranks, adults going on dark tourism trips to Chernobyl. There are many domains of existence in which people voluntarily seek out frightening experiences and derive pleasure from it. So that's the paradoxical phenomenon we're trying to understand in the lab. And one of the early studies we did was one in which we set out to investigate how many people actually claim to like frightening media. So this is a big survey study in which we asked people, do you like frightening media? Horror movies, scary video games, frightening books, and so on. And I guess somewhat to our surprise, we found that actually most people, based on this sample, most people say, yes, I enjoy frightening media. That's more than half of the population. There is a small portion of people who are kind of undecided. They're on the fence. They don't really like it, but they also sort of like it. Maybe they're the kinds of people who can be convinced to watch a scary movie on Saturday night if their friends insist. And then the remaining quarter or so claim not to like frightening media at all. But keep in mind, this is frightening media, which is just one instantiation of recreational fear. There are people who dislike horror movies who still enjoy other kinds of activities in which they can feel fear and anxiety and other so-called negative emotions and derive pleasure from that engagement. The study was published a few years ago in a journal called The Evolutionary Behavioral Sciences. After this study, we set out to do more kind of field-oriented studies. And so we entered into a collaboration with Dystopia Entertainment, which is the market leader of interactive, immersive, theatrical horror experiences in Denmark. Ever since 2016, Dystopia has very generously allowed us to visit their haunted attraction every year around Halloween to collect data on recreational fear. And so with literally dozens of research assistants, volunteers from the English department, we have gone to Dystopia Haunted House to collect data year after year. And this is proven to be one of the most rich pipelines of data for recreational fear. And the first study we did was published in 2019. It's called Adrenaline Junkies and White Knucklers, Quantitative Study of Fear Management in Haunted House Visitors. And in this study, we recruited guests in the haunted attraction and gave them a challenge. We told them they could either try to become as afraid as possible, so maximize their own fear, or they could try to minimize fear, try to stay unafraid. And as it happened, out of the 280 or so guests who agreed to participate in this study, half of them chose the maximize fear condition, and the other half chose the minimize fear condition. And so the guests you see in this picture have entered a scary dark room, and then a photo is taken of them when a flash goes off and zombies scream at them. And these guests, as you can probably tell, are in the minimize fear condition. They're trying their best to keep fear at a minimum level. In contrast to these guests in the same room, we're trying to maximize fear. And the cool thing we found in this study is that people in the minimize fear condition report significantly lower levels of fear than people in the maximize fear condition. But people in both groups report similar and very high levels of satisfaction. So the take-home message is, when people seek out recreational fear experiences, they're actively engaged in regulating their own fear. They use cognitive and behavioral and social strategies to achieve the right level of fear, which allows them to feel the maximum level of pleasure. For some people, it's about keeping fear at a tolerable level, and for other people, the so-called adrenaline junkies, it's about maximizing fear. But there are different ways in which you can have a fun experience with fear. And people, when they seek out scary entertainment, aren't just passive observers, they're actively engaged in making the best of the experience. Following year, we did a new study at Dystopia Haunted House, and this was a much more ambitious study involving about 30 research assistants and almost a kilometer of network cable. Because one of the things we did in this study was to mount surveillance cameras and infrared lights in some of the scariest rooms so that we would have behavioral data in addition to self-report data and also physiological data. So what you see in the video here is guests entering a room, and these are research assistants, which is why I'm allowed to show the video. They enter the room, they're met by an actor, a scare actor, who is impersonating a crazy scientist, or maybe a Shakespearean figure, or a combination. He's talking to a skull, he's delivering an unsettling monologue. And his monologue has two aims. One is to unsettle the guests. He's saying crazy things. He's acting in a very erratic and unpredictable way. The second aim is to distract the guests from the fact that underneath the table behind them is a zombie. And so the zombie actor is waiting for a cue from the other actor. Here it comes. And then he jumps up, and the guests are frightened. And this is very interesting data because we can look at their facial expressions. We could look at their movement, the way in which they crowd together when they get a jump scare, the way in which they scream and then laugh, and some of them just laugh, which tells us very interesting things about the phenomenon and its social dimension. And so this study was published about a year ago. It's called Playing with Fear, a field study in recreational horror. And one of the coolest things we found in this study is that if you look at the relationship between self-reported fear and self-reported enjoyment, it is not linear. So for a long time, people have thought that in the domain of horror and recreational fear, there is a linear relationship between fear and enjoyment, so that the more fear, the better. You know, the scarier the movie, the better. The scarier the haunted attraction, the better. But that's not what we found. We found what we call an inverted U shape, as you can see on the plot here, suggesting that there is a sweet spot of fear, just the right amount of fear, which allows you to derive the maximum amount of pleasure. So that was the second study we did in Dystopia Haunted House. Again, providing an important piece in the puzzle of recreational fear and providing an important stone in the scientific foundation of this current Apex of Fear project. We also did a study in which we looked at the constructive uses to which people can put recreational fear and horror. And so we looked at whether horror movie fans exhibited better psychological resilience during the COVID lockdown. Was it the case that people who watch many horror movies had better psychological health during lockdowns? Our thinking was that maybe people seek out recreational fear to learn something about their own emotional register, to practice emotional coping, to get better at manipulating their own emotions. And that is indeed what we found. People who watch many horror movies reported better psychological health, fewer symptoms of psychological stress. And then shortly after that study, we moved even more into the field because of Corona restrictions. So when we went to Dystopia Haunted House to collect data, we set up a research tent to allow for social distancing. And in this study, we built on the previous results to learn something about the different motivations people have for seeking out horror and the learning potentials of scary entertainment. And we found that there are three kinds of horror fans: the adrenaline junkies, who want maximum stimulation; the white knucklers, who seek out horror to as a challenge in keeping fear at a tolerable level. And then we found a third kind, which we call dark copers. And the interesting thing is that these three different horror fans, three different types, get different things out of horror. The adrenaline junkies report mood boosts. They seek out scary entertainment and they're in a better mood. The white knucklers don't report a mood boost, but they say they learn something about themselves and they feel they develop as a person. They learn something about their own limits. They learn something about their own capacity to cope, and they feel they get better at coping. And then there are the dark copers, who are often people with mental health problems, depression or anxiety, who use scary entertainment as self-medication. And they report learning and developing as a person and also a mood boost. So this is very interesting. We also have a few studies in the pipeline, including studies on interoception, synchronization, bonding potentials of horror, and kids and recreational fear. And of course, most pertinently today, the Apex of Fear project.
Okay, so now I will talk a little bit more about what we are actually doing within the Apex of Fear project. So thank you, Mathias, for taking us through the research that led here. I am also part of the team together with Jonas, who is also here today, and we have a bunch of international collaborators without whom this wouldn't be possible. I'll let Jonas tell you about himself when it's his turn to talk, but I will briefly just tell you about myself. My name is Terkildsen. I am a recent hire at the Recreational Fear Lab at Aarhus University. My background is within psychophysiology, and I'm a psychologist by training, worked with how to devise exposure therapy for anxiety, and generally how to measure emotions through physiology. And so that's kind of the background I brought into this project. And together with Mathias and Jonas, we put together our competencies to form this project. But that being said, we have some international collaborators in Georgios Yanakis, who is a professor at the Institute of Digital Media at the University of Malta. He is an expert on all things player modeling and affective computing. And so we are very happy to have him on board to supervise the construction of these algorithms that the Apex of Fear project will heavily depend on, but I'll get back to that. And then we have Regan Mandrick, who is also a professor, but at the University of Saskatchewan. And she was kind of the pioneer that started this whole idea of putting psychophysiology into use in video games. And so, again, very pleased to have her aboard, and her expertise is going to be invaluable. And then we have Lenanake, who is an associate professor at the University of Waterloo, where he's the director of the games, what's it called, the HCI for Games Lab. And he will be primarily assisting on evaluating the outcomes of this project, because his expertise is within games user research. So he will primarily help us devise methodology to evaluate whether this new type of horror entertainment is better or worse than existing solutions. We hope for the better, obviously. But yeah, so that was just a brief introduction to the entire team. Again, Jonas will come back. We'll come back to him in a second. But the next thing I just wanted to show, I'm not going to go through each of these studies, and Mathias has taken us through some of the work that the Recreational Fear Lab has done. But basically, this is just a selection of the research that has led to where we are today, where we have shown how it's possible in the lab to measure user states based on physiology. So we have shown that we can accurately measure anxiety, enjoyment, presence, or immersion in video games, and doing this through physiological measures. So now the idea of this project is to take these models that we've built through our research into the wild and see whether it stands up to the real world, basically, and when you're physically enjoying a horror experience. And so we basically, in the Apex of Fear project, we are planning on marrying the best of both the physical world and the virtual world. So we are setting up a factory scale or like warehouse scale VR experience that is about 45 minutes, and it's going to take place in at Dystopia's facilities in Vejle, where we have gracefully been allowed to use 10 by 20 meters of space. The experience will be a multiplayer experience where each player will be equipped with physiological measurement equipment and of course a VR headset. And this will allow us to measure their emotional states in real time and adapt the game to suit them. And I'll come back to how we plan to do this. But at first, we just want to take you through, because it might sound like a lot when you're looking at this little silhouette and the different, graphs that comes out from it. And it might sound like that's a lot of sensors to have on someone. But today we have focused a lot on trying to keep the solution as unobtrusive as possible. So we are very fortunate to have a great collaborator in MTech Labs who've developed this insert for the VR headsets that allow us to measure facial EMG. So we're measuring activity along the corrugator muscle, which we're using for frowning. And then we are using it along the zygomatic bone, which is, we can see zygomaticus major contracting, which is typically used for smiling, but it's also used to indicate as an intensifier for different emotions. For instance, if you're really sad, you will see that the zygomatic major will activate, and the same goes for pain, but it also goes for pleasure. And also in the headset, there is a built-in heart rate monitor that captures your heart rate in real time. And these things are all very useful for the algorithms that we're constructing. And also we have that, those are the ones that are built into the headset. This is the headset I just shown. It's not the VR headset we're actually going to be using. The VR headset we are using is it's called the Nico Neo 3 Pro I. It's quite a mouthful, and that one is wireless. So we really wanted to make sure that there was no strings and no cables tethering you to the virtual world. We wanted the experience to be as seamless as possible, so we can control the virtual layer that you're in, but then you are physically running around this facility being chased by monsters together with your friends. So the experience is set up for 3 players because it was important for us to capture some of the group dynamics that Mathias also mentioned. And also, currently this equipment is still not consumer products. So in order to keep it within the budget of the project, we wanted to, of course, go beyond 2, which is not really a group, but 3 kind of, it's easy to see how that can scale to 5 players at 6 players, given the budget to buy more equipment. But yeah, so apart from the headset, which is capturing facial EMG and heart rate, we have this little sensor from, now I'll do what the YouTubers do. I'll try to get it in focus, but it's a little hub from Biosignal Plugs, where you basically strap this onto your chest using a respiration strap. So we can measure how much your breathing rate throughout the experience. And then we are also tying in electrodermal activity, which is a measure of your skin conductance, i.e. how much you're sweating. And we're measuring that from the hands, and that has been shown to linearly correlate with arousal. So we are trying to gather as many measures as possible to keep because we've seen through our lab studies that it's important that a measure of emotion is not just based on one measure alone, but it's multimodal, because what would happen is that you would also start sweating in your hands by running around physically in this room, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're afraid just because you're running. So we need to have additional sensors to validate the readings made. And yeah, so we have the electrodermal activities, we have respiration, and then we have skin temperature as well, which has been shown to be important for measuring fear, because once we experience fear, our blood is rushing from our extremities into our larger locomotion muscles to facilitate the action of flight. And as such, our hands start to feel cold. I'm betting on most of you have experienced that going into an exam or a job interview. You can feel your hands are feeling sweaty and clammy and cold, and that's exactly the response that we are hoping to capture through this equipment. And then we have added quite a novel measure that has not really been used much in the scientific literature, which is a measure of the trapezius muscle, which is the muscle that you are using to lift your shoulders up. And for horror, we know that when you are afraid, we tend to lift our shoulders to protect the vulnerable areas of the neck. So this is what we are hoping to capture, this kind of an operationalized measure of suspense by having, looking at the activation of this muscle group in particular. So that's kind of the equipment that goes into it. And as I mentioned, we have a partnership with MTech Labs, who've done extraordinary work with building the algorithms based on their headset. And we are planning on marrying that with our algorithms and hopefully making something that is, seamless for the player. But we're also partnering with the Danish company called iMotions, which we're going to be using as our data platform for taking in all this data. Because kind of the idea with, and what we pitched to the Innovation Fund when they graciously gave us funding for this project, was that we wanted to have a way of having people come in and enjoy a horror experience, but it still allows us to capture data in an ecological manner, the same way as Mathias and his team has done with Dystopia, going down and capturing ecological data at the haunted house. We wanted to have a way that we can capture all this physiological data in a real environment. So that's part of the pitches, that we will continuously build upon this database. And as such, our machine learning algorithms will get better and better as it's fed more data. At least that's the hope. But yeah, so basically, but why are we doing this? Why are we adding physiological measures into the mix? And the whole idea is that we have Regan Mandrick, who's on the team. She did a systematic review of effective gaming technology, how that's been used in research settings and what outcomes we've seen from that. And they found that adding effective computing or effective gaming technology, adding these physiological measures into games, allowed for higher levels of immersion and higher levels of enjoyment and higher levels of emotional engagement, which are all very important user experience constructs for designing a horror experience. So we are very encouraged by what we've seen already, not only on our own research, but generally echoed across the entire field of effective computing and effective gaming. And given that these findings point into these positive outcomes, it's surprising that we haven't seen a widespread adoption of this technology into mainstream media. In fact, there is, less than a handful of games that has even attempted adding physiological measures. And so this is quite novel in that sense, and especially also adding it into a VR game and in a factory setting is non-trivial from a technological standpoint. So that is also a key part of this research project, is to figure out, can we filter the data properly to not have all the noise that is normally associated with running around. So that is part of the research project as well. But what Regan also found when they were reviewing a literature on effective gaming, they found that there is this kind of a effective game loop of like how people are using physiological measures in games. And we are planning on utilizing this model. You can see it on the side of the screen that one part is using these physiological measures for input mapping. An example of this would be, instead of pressing shift on your keyboard to hold your breath, normally if you're playing a first-person shooter, you would steady your aim with a sniper by clicking shift. In our cases, if a monster approaches and is close to you, we require you to physically hold your breath while it's close to not being detected. And so we're trying to remove this distance between the player controller and the player's body, as to make, physically placing the player's body inside the game. And another way of doing this is we are taking this physiological input and we're adapting the game based on it. So Mathias mentioned the sweet spot of fear, or like this Goldilocks zone of fear, where we want to keep people within a certain, we don't want to go too scary. We don't want to go too boring or less scary. So that will be part of the algorithm, is continuously adjusting. So for instance, let's say that we can tell that you are high up on our arousal scales currently, and you're showing high levels of fear. And lower levels of enjoyment. We will try to balance this out in real time by changing the music, taking things that you are less scared of. Part of the experience is running a calibration where we are, figuring out what kind of phobias are you responding to. Are you arachnophobic, or are you aquaphobic, or and so we will construct this kind of a hierarchy that we also know from exposure therapy, where you kind of go through, okay, what is the least scary situation and what is the highest, and we will use this hierarchy that will be constructed through physiological measures and using eye tracking on what people are looking at to pick what kind of stimuli we would stimulus we'll put on the screen right now to keep you within that sweet spot of fear. It could, for instance, be that a jump scare is triggered once we can see that you are starting to get low on the arousal scale. So if you need that boost back up, we will trigger a jump scare for you. And the way that we are doing this, we are basically taking all these physiological measures that we have from these various sensors, and we're transforming it into what is called arousal valence space. You can see it on the bottom, where we basically have, it's basically a grid that we have different emotions that we know fall within this certain positions within this grid. And then we can check, we can see, okay, well, you're in the fear region of this grid now, which is, high arousal, but on negative valence, so a negative emotion. And we're using that to make our decisions about what should happen in the game. The last thing I just want to briefly show is, I forgot to mention one more part of the effective game loop, which is the physiological projection, which is that we are using the heart rate measured from the headset to play back to the players to condition them that they are listening to their own heart rate. So this is what you normally know from biofeedbacks. So we will give them a sense of where they are physiologically and in terms of arousal, and then we will manipulate it. So if we want you to have a higher level of arousal, we will speed up the heart rate you're listening to kind of start this emotional feedback loop that hopefully will make sure that the rest of the body follows this idea, that follows the manipulated heart rate. And so these are the kind of tricks we will be using and the kind of implementations that we are doing. Of course, this is a proof of concept. We are planning a 30 to 45 minute escape room experience in VR, and Jonas will talk more about the escape room market in Denmark and in general. And the last thing I just want to show is a quick demo we built a single player version of these algorithms and this signal processing before we went into pitching, just to make sure that it actually was possible to have all these sensors running in real time. So here you can see an overview of the data coming in, and where we're mapping you on a curve for the sweet spot, and we can see what you're looking at and what your reaction to that would be. And so we can annotate the data in real time, which allows for supervised learning techniques, supervised machine learning techniques in the future. So yeah, this is just to give you an idea of what we're doing and idea about the project. We will gladly answer questions after Jonas has pitched, which I will give word to him now. So Jonas, please unmute yourself and tell us more about the industry side.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me just share my screen. Let's see. This one, let's see. How's that?
That's good.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Thomas. I'm Jonas. I'm the architect of fear at Dystopia Entertainment here in Vejle in Denmark, where we design interactive horror experiences, mostly haunted houses. And we started in 2014, and since then we've been scaring people all over Denmark, some in our own haunted attractions and some in amusement parks and museums, etc. And since we started, we've scared more than 100,000 people. So I'm coming to this through my experience of designing and running haunted houses, and from an industry business angle. So my focus is on the development of the experience itself, as well as making it available for users. And I'll go into some of the current state of recreational fear and some of the trends in entertainment and media. And one of such trends, a big trend these days, is immersion, making the user feel like they are being pulled into an imagined world or experience. Immersiveness can be increased by having a detailed set design, a believable narrative, and convincing characters. However, a big part of immersion is up to the users themselves. But our job as content creators is to make the environment realistic and engaging in order to facilitate the immersion. The other two trends I'll touch on also play into this one. So a tool for further immersion and a big trend in itself is interactivity. Having interactive elements in an experience gives the user a feeling of agency and makes them able to have an impact in the world they are in. Interactivity is increased by having installations or items that can be manipulated, but also rises when having a dialogue with an actor in a haunt or an NPC in a computer game, as long as the interaction in some way affects the outcome of the narrative. So at our haunted attraction, we've seen the demand for interactivity with actors and environment rise through the years, and users keep wanting more. And this leads me to the third trend of personalization. So expanding on the trends of immersion and interactivity, personalization makes the user feel like they are the main character of their own horror movie or computer game. This feeling of being central to the events that are unfolding is what puts the me in media. Consumers are increasingly enjoying media tailored to their own personal preferences and demands, and want to exert a greater control over what and how they experience media. As such, there's a great demand for custom-made experiences that puts the user in focus. Our Apex project is very much driven by these trends, and our solution allows for high immersiveness, lots of interactivity, and a large degree of personalization. I'll also touch a little on the horror market and the market for escape rooms. So looking at the market of recreational fear, media, and entertainment based on horror is all on the rise. One example of this development is a large increase in horror films as part of all feature films, in which they now account for more than 1 out of every 10 movies. It is now much more common for a horror movie to become a blockbuster, and they often have revenues in the hundreds of millions of dollars. A more recent development in entertainment is the escape room wave, which has swept the world in recent years. As such, the US saw an explosion in the amount of escape rooms from 2015 to 2018, and many of them are horror-based. Escape rooms have also hit Denmark, most noticeably with the company Locked, that currently have 7 locations in Denmark and are looking to expand. In Dystopia, we've also felt the increase in appetite for recreational fear. As such, the number of visitors to our haunted attraction has increased dramatically from our launch in 2014, although somewhat restricted by the pandemic. As such, we had more than 25,000 guests in 2021 last year, and we expect that number to only increase in the years to come. From a business standpoint, the horror industry is consistently profitable and continues to grow with no signs of stopping. This might be due to how well horror aligns with current trends in immersion, interaction, and personalization in the market of entertainment. People want unique experiences that put them in focus, that give them a sense of agency, and that not only tickle their intellect, but their emotion, even intense horror experiences that make them feel alive. As such, the market for haunted attractions in the US is currently around $300 to $500 million. The market size for emotion detection and recognition technology is around $20 billion. And for VR and gaming, it's around $12 billion. Each year, the digital content accounts for a larger portion of revenue in media and entertainment. In 2017, it overtook non-digital content, and by the end of this year, it's projected to reach 60%. All of these mentioned earlier are expected to increase in the coming years as technology gets refined and demand for personalized, immersive, and interactive experience increases. There's a demand for premium recreational fear attractions in Denmark and around the world. So Working for years in the haunted house industry, we've become aware of some of the shortcomings of doing in-person attractions, but other platforms also have their limits. Here's an overview of relatable media showcasing their shortcomings. As shown, each platform has advantages, but none of the current media solutions tick all the boxes in regard to the current trends, especially not personalization. At the same time, they struggle with replayability without significant operation costs. We suggest that our solution will tick all the boxes at moderate operating costs, and such that Apex of Fear is the next leap in horror entertainment. Thank you.